brought tons of value to our company and has a lot of leverage, in part through our involvement in machine learning products. And so I'm really excited to share with you today about the process that we go through to set up machine learning products for success. So to frame a little bit about Airbnb to start off with, we're a two-sided marketplace for accommodations. When I used to do this talk, people didn't know what Airbnb was, so I'm excited that now probably more people do know what it is. At its core, we have hosts and guests who are all unique and have different preferences and desires. And so when we think about a marketplace that's so differentiated, we think about machine learning as a way to personalize and to optimize our user experience. So, if you're looking for a place in Paris, every person has a different travel date and desire, location preference, and we can't show you 6,000 places in Paris. You won't have a successful booking experience. And so throughout our product, we're always thinking about how can we personalize, how can we make this better, and how can we use data to improve the user experience. We use machine learning at all steps in the booking process at Airbnb. So this is a timeline of you start off and you're looking for a place, then you decide maybe that one looks good, you send a contact, you might get an acceptance, and then you go on your trip. And at the end of your trip, you're asked to leave a review. And so this is a screenshot of some of the different points and teams where we're using machine learning. So you can see that it's many, and this is just a partial mapping. Okay, so how do we think about the life cycle of a machine learning product? The first step in any product is sizing, opportunity, and scope. And so this is where we say, okay, we have this idea. How do we know that this is a good idea to the best of our ability, right? We're never going to know for sure until we try it, but how can we make an educated guess and a data-driven guess on whether this is the right investment? The second step is setting up our model architecture. So what is the label that we're going to try and predict? What type of architecture will be best suited to solve the business problem? Then we have data pipelines and processing to get our data ready to build a model. Then we think about model optimization, right? And finally, we put it in production and we think about evaluation, both online and offline. So this talk is about before the model. So the initial formulation of the problem is often key to the success of a machine learning product. So this is something where, we often talk when we're thinking about machine learning about, what's the right feature transformation, what type of model will give us the best precision and accuracy. I'm going to argue that these two stages are actually the most important focus areas for you when you're building a machine learning product. Because you can have the most optimized model, but if you're not tackling the right business problem or your labels and what you're trying to do isn't right, then you're not going to have a successful data product. The first step of this, and this is my takeaway point at the beginning, and you'll hear this hammered throughout, is that you need to have a target metric that you're trying to move. So thinking about pure prediction on its own isn't going to add value to your business. You need to be framing this in terms of a business metric. And so at Airbnb, we have an OKR system called Objective Key Results, where each team has a metric that they're trying to move. And so you'll be tracking that metric over time. And when you're thinking about a machine learning product, you'll think about how we can move that metric. And obviously you're thinking about improving the user experience. The metric is a proxy for that, but that's the idea, right? So that's really important. And to start off with, I'll share an example that will demonstrate how that works. So some of you may know that Airbnb has pricing recommendations for our hosts, smart pricing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that it took to get there. So about 4 years ago, I actually started hosting on Airbnb. And so when I started hosting, I was faced with, in my flow of listing my place, what price should I set? And every host is faced with this. And as an online marketplace where we don't set prices, our hosts actually don't have that there already for them. So many companies that are selling a product will set the price for you, but for us, we leave it up to our hosts. And so our hosts, we found, were doing things like, looking at their neighborhood, seeing what the other places were priced at, and trying to come up with the right price. And it was causing a lot of angst too, because you had that kind of FOMO, fear of missing out, where you're like, oh, maybe I charged too little, and then I could have gotten more money otherwise, or you might think your place is amazing and actually it's not that great, and so you set a really high price and then you don't get booked. And so there are all these things that can go wrong when you're thinking about pricing. And the reality is that behind the scenes we have a ton of data that can help our hosts to make a better choice. And this was something that we knew and had already had a solution in place that I'll talk to you a little bit about, but what we realized was that there was room for improvement. So the start of the series of improvements that led to our current state was back in 2014, not that long ago, but a couple years ago, where I was leading the marketplace data science team, and we were planning for the year. And we were thinking about, over this next year, what's the highest impact project that we can work on to drive revenue for our company and also to help our hosts? And our answer was pricing. You know, we knew that our current model had room for improvement, and this was something we could work on. And so that was how it started, really, where we went offsite, we went to an Airbnb listing, we had a couple days, and we started playing around with the data and thinking about, you know, what could we do that would have a big impact. So the step one piece of this is sizing the opportunity and scope, right? So we had this hunch that we thought that pricing was an opportunity. Well, how do we prove that out? And when you're thinking about building a machine learning product, you also need to think about what's the right time horizon and what are the resources that I'm going to need. And you want to make a case for it, right? So any data-driven company will be thinking about how do we make investments that are going to pay off and use data to inform that. So the first thing we did was we highlighted all the ways that prices mattered in our ecosystem. So we looked at the impact of price on booking and rebooking. We looked at price filter usage by our guests. So, you know, one proxy is by saying, like, look, almost all of our guests are using a price filter. Clearly, this matters quite a bit to them when they're making a decision. So if we can inform the pricing strategy, this will help our guests too. And then we also noticed variations by market and by many other dimensions, right? So what we saw was that, you know, there wasn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Different places had different spikes. Maybe in Austin there was South by Southwest, and that was a particular demand spike that we would need to account for. And we needed something that was going to be flexible, and our current model wasn't doing that. We ended up with about a 50-slide deck that one member of my team presented to executives. And that was really impactful and meaningful for us. First, we did the upfront work to show that that was the right thing to do, and then we got buy-in on that project, right? And a project like this, to start off with, it usually takes about 6 months, in part because when you start off, you might not get it right. So you might need to iterate, and you might need to make changes. And if you have a really short time horizon, then you're not going to have enough leeway to get the impact to be able to move forward with the project. So this was a key step for us, is, you know, doing that initial work to say, hey, this is worth it, and this is what we think it's going to take. This is one example of an analysis that we did. So we looked at the value rating. So after you leave a review, you have different attributes that you rate your listing, and value is one of them. And we found that value is the most significant predictor of whether or not a guest would come back to book again. So if a guest thought it was a great value, then they would come back. Okay, so where were we? As I mentioned, we had something in place, right? And so what we were doing was sort of that initial first step. If you were like, oh, I want to work on pricing, right? It was a price prediction model. So we said, why don't we look at our current prices of listings and build a model to say, you know, given the features of the listing and the market and many other features that we could include, let's predict the price. And then we'll extrapolate that to our hosts and give them a suggestion based on that. And this was mimicking what our hosts were currently doing on our site, and also adding more data that they might not have had access to. But what we realized was that the underlying motivation for hosts to think about looking at the other listings was not to set a price that was the same as those other listings or comparable to those other listings. It was to figure out what would get them revenue and get them bookings. And so that was actually what we wanted to be optimizing on. So this is the step which is also so critical, as I mentioned, is the model architecture step. And so in the past, when we had this framed as a pricing prediction model, we were missing out and actually not meeting the needs of our hosts. So we changed our architecture to think instead about what was the price that you would need to set to get the bookings and revenue that you wanted. And so the model was flipped on its head to say, instead of predicting price, let's use price as one of the features in a model to predict whether or not the listing gets a booking. And so then you can actually, you don't have a price that you're showing, you're having a probability of booking. And that gives you so much flexibility. And the way that we formulated the problem was we thought about it in terms of not just one price, but we thought about what was the price on any given day so that we could have variation across different days, and we could have it be alternating every single day, updating dynamically. This also led to interesting user experience opportunities where, because we didn't have just one price and we had this probability, we could showcase to you different features in our UX that might help you to understand better what price you should set. Some people actually don't want to be booked all the time, right? Maybe they want to set a high price and only get a couple bookings. Well, now we can say, hey, actually, this is the right price. If you only want to get a couple bookings, go for it. And that gave us a lot more leeway, and it enabled us to create a better experience for our hosts. Another interesting piece of this is that, as I mentioned, we don't set the prices, so we're giving these suggestions to our hosts and empowering them to set the right price for them. But we also needed to take into account that delta between what we knew was the right price to get them booked versus what they thought was the right price to get them booked. So that kind of discrepancy between your own perception of what you wanted and what it probably was. I mean, obviously our model has some error, but it's probably closer. And so we looked at building into our model user adoption and trying to understand how we could filter back the information we were getting from whether or not our users were taking our prices to inform our model. And in some cases, maybe the users actually had information we didn't have, and so that actually is important information for us to know. After this initial work, and we've been iterating on this model, we actually have a team of 15 people working on this. It's an extremely powerful lever for our hosts, and that all came from one offsite, and this is sort of talking through all of the steps that we went through to get it started. Okay, so learnings, have your target metric be a business outcome, not the precision and recall of your model. Make sure that you're thinking about what is the business metric that you care about, have your model be directed towards that. That will make it clear what you need to do to have the impact that you want to have. Do upfront analysis of your potential impact, and look at user behavior when you're thinking about your model architecture. And the final point is to make time for thinking about machine learning products. So we've had numerous amazing products come out of offsites, out of hackathons, out of a Moose Camp project, which was our new employee onboarding, where we give you a week to work on any project that you're interested in. All those have led to really amazing innovation at our company. Okay, so another example now to drive home the point about your target metric and making sure you're really careful about what you're optimizing for. So let's think about search on Airbnb. So as I mentioned, lots of different inventory, lots of different places. We want to personalize it to you and what you're looking for. We also have the host side, so some hosts are looking for a certain type of booking, and so we need to take into account all those preferences. And at the initial pass, you might think, well, I know what we should do. Let's look at our search ranking model, and we'll measure success based on whether or not our users click on those initial listings that we show, right? That might be an initial idea that people have about how we should measure success of our ranking. And so we would optimize for click-through. Well, so here's the trouble with that. On Airbnb, we have these amazing listings like windmills, castles, modern European villas, the best of Bali. And if we put those listings at the top of our search ranking, they will get really high click-through. And they actually have extremely high click-through on our site in general. But you might not be wanting to stay at a castle on this particular trip. Maybe you're going to Houston for a conference, and showing you a castle isn't going to help you very much. So we need to think about a different business metric or different thing we're going to optimize for here. So maybe we could say, what if you make a contact, right? So that's a sign that you found something that was good enough that you sent a message to a host. The trouble with that is that sometimes, more rarely now, you might get rejected by that host, right? And that's actually a terrible user experience if you contact a host and you're all excited and you don't get the place you want to get. So this is really negative, and so we want to avoid this from happening. And we want people to get to successful trips and bookings. So we've iterated on how we can incorporate the right business metric and the right objective function. And right now we have a solution where we're optimizing for a combination of outcomes. So we still have click as a small weight here and some small importance. And then we're looking at whether or not you're accepted. That's a positive. Being booked is the most positive, and being rejected is the most negative. And this is something where we're constantly iterating on it, but this gives you a sense of what we might be thinking about here, where we're looking at all of these different components and thinking about what's the right objective function. So again, target metric, think about business outcomes like bookings, think about things like rejection, and think about how you might actually want to think about a combination of outcomes. All right, so now to something a little bit different. So I think search and pricing, probably people were like, yeah, that makes sense. I understand why machine learning is useful there. How about something like business travel? That seems like something where it's not totally obvious right away what machine learning products would do for improving business travel. So I'm going to talk through how we've thought about this. So how did it start? So first of all, Airbnb, it's different than a hotel. Every unit is different. You don't necessarily have a front desk where you check in. And so we realized that actually many of our users were leisure travelers, and we didn't have as many business travelers. And so we thought about how do we test this hypothesis that business travelers have different needs than leisure travelers and build the right products for them. And one thing that we realized was that this is our new page, Airbnb for Business, so a quick plug. If you're working at a company where you travel, you can sign up for this. We realized that part of the blocker was that we didn't have a way for companies to sign up to be easily billing so that employees could easily bill to their company. There were certain features of the place that they were staying that had to be there, price range, Wi-Fi, different things like that. And so, we did research to understand that. So now we had this product that we were really excited about, and we wanted to think about how we could target business travelers in the right way to increase business travel adoption across our user base. So in order to know if there was an opportunity here for business travel versus leisure travel, we wanted to know that there were actually differences in their behaviors, and we would be able to identify who is a business versus a leisure traveler without necessarily asking every time. And so what we started off with was a place where we actually didn't know whether you were traveling for business or leisure, and the initial thing we had to do was collect a label. So we started off with collecting an initial label from 1% of our traffic, and then we were able to use that to look at our data to see if there were any differences between business and leisure travelers. And when we saw the data, we saw that there were, in fact, very significant differences, and it was actually pretty fun to see them. So, for example, business travelers often will put in an address, right? They're going to a particular office, they're going to a conference, and they'll zoom out from there. Leisure travelers will put in San Francisco, and then they'll zoom in from there to different neighborhoods. Maybe they're traveling. Business travelers generally don't travel on the weekends, right? They're traveling by themselves. So all of these characteristics, actually, we were able to get extremely high accuracy for knowing, are you a business traveler or a leisure traveler based on your behavior on our site. And so, because our goal was to target business travelers, we started off with a simple model where we predicted if you were a business traveler or not based on that data that we had initially. And we started with a simple logistic regression, and we found that it performed really well. And we've iterated on it and improved it, but actually this pretty simple formulation has been very helpful to us to then target promotions and other features that we want to show to business travelers. So learnings start with a hypothesis, collect labeled data if you don't have it so that you can formulate the problem correctly, and then start simple and see how it goes. Okay, machine learning infrastructure. So the last point that I have is a meta point, actually. So this is where I'm going to talk about how we size the opportunity and scope for machine learning infrastructure that would enable us to build machine learning infrastructure to power all data products at Airbnb. Okay, so what was the prior state of the world? We had started building data products, machine learning products, and different teams were building out their own infrastructure because there wasn't a centralized core infrastructure that was maintained that people could use. And it also required quite a bit of expertise to use, and the process was quite painful to set up any infrastructure. So that was the prior state of the world, and so we saw, okay, we think there's an opportunity for improvement here. Well, how do we make the case for it? So again, this would be something where we want to build a team around this. We don't want a couple people to work on this. We actually want a team, and we needed to know that there was going to be a payoff from doing that. And so what we did was we did a careful sizing of the opportunity and scope, and we did a lot of research around what else was out there that we could use and what was going to be especially impactful from building in-house. One aspect of this was the teams had a really fun brainstorming session where we generated ideas for 65 additional data products that we wanted to build, and then talked about, given our current infrastructure, how long would it take for us to build those, how many resources would we need, and how could we have this multiplier opportunity by building shareable components. We did a back-of-the-envelope calculation of the potential impact, and that was really important, right, to be able to say, we think this is going to make a difference. And then we created a team proposal that had clear outcomes and deliverables. around the number of users participating in machine learning, a reduced time and effort to build machine learning products, and to enable easier model evaluation, which was one of the biggest pain points that we saw. So that was the sizing of the opportunity and scope. Step 2 is actually in progress, so we're working on it now. And I will go to this page. We've added support for TensorFlow, so enabling deep learning at scale. We have some interesting challenges. So, we have this listing page here. This is my listing. And different teams were using different pieces of this to build their machine learning models in different contexts. And so we're thinking about, how do we represent a listing in an extensible way? What features apply to many models? And so, we're taking the different features and creating categorical attributes that can be used by everyone. And this is where we're going in the future. Okay, so to conclude, some guiding principles. Always start off with a target metric, focus on a business problem. That's how you're going to have the most leverage from your data products. It doesn't need to be short term, it can be long term, so you can be thinking big here, but always be thinking about not just the prediction and the model and optimizing, but what are you trying to solve? And then analyze your user behavior. So is there an opportunity for personalization, or actually are all your users using this in the same way, and so you wouldn't have much gain if you tried to personalize? What do you think the impact will be on the metric? And how will your user interact with the machine learning product? And think about that user experience. And then finally, when you're thinking about the architecture of your model, the setup is often the most important part. So start simple and iterate, and think about how the architecture maps to your business problem and what you're really trying to solve. All right, thank you very much.